In yesterday's devotional, we tackled that passage that has caused so much controversy in the church, especially over the last few decades, the passage in which Paul says, "Wives, be subject to your husbands." Some in the church take this to be an immutable law concerning the proper relationship between husbands and wives. But today's passage reveals why this is problematic. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas. And this is your daily devotional for Friday, January 24th, 2025. As you probably have picked up on, I do not agree with this take on the passage. I don't believe it is an immutable law of the faith that wives are to be subservient to husbands. In the first place, it misses Paul's primary point, which is for members of the church to be subject to each other, which he then spells out in a series of relationship types, which simply takes the then current arrangements as just a given. But in the second place, part of what comes next calls into question whether the arrangements themselves were the point or the larger command to be subject to one another. In today's passage, Paul highlights two kinds of household relationships, one which we can relate to instantly, and one which is foreign to us. Here's what he writes about the first one. "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. And fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord." This one makes a certain amount of sense. Quoting from the Ten Commandments, Paul urges children to honor their parents, by which he really means they should obey their parents. Not particularly controversial, but it's what he says to fathers in particular that really shows what he's after. Fathers should not provoke their children to anger. Do you see what Paul has done here? He's made parent-child relationships mutual. Not equal necessarily, but mutual. Now this sounds reasonable to us, but in the context of that day and age, it would have been extraordinary, even revolutionary. The idea that parents had any obligations to their children besides food, clothing, and shelter. Their emotional well-being? Not so much. Applying the same sort of logic, Paul now turns to a different household relationship, and again his guidance would have been revolutionary. He writes, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters with fear and trembling, in singleness of heart, as you obey Christ, not only while being watched and in order to please them, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. Render service with enthusiasm, as to the Lord, and not to men and women, knowing that whatever good we do, we will receive the same again from the Lord, whether we are slaves or free. And masters, do the same to them. Stop threatening them, for you know that both of you have the same master in heaven, and with him there is no partiality." What? Masters treat slaves well? Unheard of. But that simply shows that what Paul is after here is a whole new spin on relationships, one in which even unequal relationships, there should be a sense of mutuality. Now, here's the deal. To assume the Bible is saying that husbands and wives live in unalterable, God-ordained relationships of superior and inferior also means assuming that the institution of slavery is also ordained by God. And practically no reasonable purpose in our age would agree that God has ordained slavery. What I'm saying is that we should keep our eye on the ball here. It's not about wives being subservient any more than insisting that slavery is okay. What's at stake is not freezing first-century marriage arrangements in place. It's about pointing toward a new life in Christ in which relationships have a mutual element. Mutuality, not subservience, is what's at stake here. And that remains a revolutionary idea. Tomorrow, we finish our walk through Ephesians, and Paul uses a metaphor that some find helpful and others disturbing. We'll see what you make of it. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.